David Pendleton.
Yes, sir.
How in the world are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny day. We had rain.
Yeah, are we going to get some more?
I'll see what I can do.
That'd be great. We love it. Now, Dave Michaels is on the premises, but he's not here. He is so busy setting up today's surprise Dave Cave.
He's got
offerings.
a surprise for us today.
He's got a surprise for everyone.
Ooh.
And so you should plan to come on down to the Dave Cave.
Come on down, find out
he'll
what
be
it's
here.
all about.
He'll be here from now until 2 p.m. today. And deals that'll make you squeal, as he says, and as I love to say.
And he's always right about that.
But surprise today. So if you want to call Dave Michaels, you can call him at 831-218-KSCO, 218-5726. Okay? If you want to call him and talk to him directly. But much better to just come on down to the Dave Cave right here at your favorite radio station. But we're going to have a barn burner today.
All right.
On the radio, on the Saturday special. This is my kind of Saturday special, the likes of which we haven't done really very much since the 90s. It's become more and more difficult to do point-counterpoint Saturday specials. So I was thrilled when Rosie told me that we've got the best guest we can finally get for this, we could possibly get for this particular issue, which is Measure D. So let's start the program officially, okay?
Good morning, a brighter day is here. Good morning, may we bring you cheer.
We've got time, we've got tunes, we've got time, tunes, and temperature.
Get up and go, it's today, you know, on KSCO Radio.
You know, I just realized we've been using that jingle for years and years. How often, it says we've got time, we've got tunes, we've got temperature. How often do we give time, tunes, and temperature on the Saturday special? Maybe it's an inappropriate jingle.
Well, I wouldn't say it's inappropriate. I mean, we do have singing here.
Okay, here, like this right now. See, it's coming up.
Good morning, now stay right here on KSCO Radio.
One of the most contentious ballot measures in many years is to be voted on in June in Santa Cruz County. Measure D. Is this measure neither green nor the right way? Or is it the best transit mix and responsible use of taxpayer money? Measure D. You decide. Join MZ and guests from both sides this Saturday on the Saturday Special from 10 a.m. to noon on your Everyone's Got an Opinion on This One radio station, AM 1080 KSCO.
As I said, we've got two very appropriate, couldn't be better than guests on the Saturday special. Bud Colligan is on the steering committee of the Yes on Measure D Greenway. He's a 26-year resident of Santa Cruz, longtime community volunteer, working on affordable housing projects, long-term solutions to homelessness, the arts, education, and health care. Bud is here to speak in favor of Measure D. Also in the studio is Mark Messitti Miller, who's a professional civil engineer with over 3 decades of experience designing buildings, bridges, and coastal structures, as well as serving the community as a volunteer dedicated to improving public transportation and expanding affordable housing for everyone's benefit. Gentlemen, Bud and Mark, welcome to KSCO Studios. It's great to have you guys. And why don't we start with a 5-minute presentation from each of you, starting with Bud, because you're the author of Measure D, as I understand it. Why don't you tell us what Measure D is all about and why you got involved and so forth. Bud Colligan.
Sure. Thank you very much, Michael, for having us today. The Regional Transportation Commission voted last year not to accept the passenger rail business plan. When faced with the facts, the commissioners finally blinked and stopped the 10 years of waste in pursuing an unrealistic rail plan. The RTC has none of the $1.3 billion cost. So the only question left for voters is, what type of trail do you want and how soon can it be built? Greenway is a 32-mile trail accessible to all and can be built now. The trail will preserve the natural landscape and showcase the beauty of our coastline. It will separate bikes and pedestrians so that it's safe for all and also provide commuters an alternative to using cars. It will move us closer to a countywide goal of 20% of commuters on bikes, cutting air pollution. There are no detours onto streets, making Greenway the safest route to schools and work. It also promotes the health of our community. That's why over 200 doctors support Greenway. Opponents of a Greenway would have you believe that a train in 30 years will take people off Highway 1 and reduce air pollution. The fact is, even if a train were ever implemented, it would take less than 2% of cars off of Highway 1. The climate crisis is now, and we must take action now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and treat the planet more gently. Leading environmentalists support Yes on D because it is the ecological trail proposal. Greenway preserves the only forested and coastal corridor left in the county for humans and wildlife. It will be available for future generations who will thank us for the forward-thinking decision to not industrialize the little open space and nature we have left. The opponent's trail plan would result in heavy industrialization of the corridor with concrete and steel retaining walls, fences separating neighborhoods and preventing beach access, and cutting down hundreds of heritage trees. Over 20,000 voters have signed one of the Greenway petitions between 2018 and today. It is clear that Greenway is the people's choice. We believe power and inspiration comes from grassroots movements of voters organizing and acting to affect change in the community. We are fighting the status quo of inaction and politics as usual. Our opponents are running a highly negative and misleading campaign. They claim the trail is being built, but only 1.5 miles of 32 miles of trail have been built in 10 years. At this rate, it will take over 200 years to complete. Now, hundreds of millions of dollars are needed to finish their trail because costs have escalated dramatically to build 24 new bridges and huge concrete retaining walls. The corridor, as you know it, will be unrecognizable, all to preserve 100-year-old tracks that all need to be replaced no matter what. For just 8.5 miles of trail between the San Lorenzo Bridge and Rio Del Mar, the cost difference for the trail next to the tracks plan versus Greenway is $130 million. And Watsonville gets almost no trail from our opponents, as the trail is detoured for 5 miles onto San Andreas Road and West Beach Street. Greenway protects and preserves Roaring Camp, including the beach train. In fact, the Greenway Initiative only applies from the San Lorenzo River south. Our opponents claim that Roaring Camp will be cut off from the National Rail Network. Roaring Camp has been cut off since the winter storms of 2017 and will be cut off for the next 30 years because the Capitola Trestle is out of service indefinitely and will cost $30 million to replace. The claim of deception by our opponents is nothing more than a cheap campaign trick. Greenway has been fighting for you for the last 8 years, always saying the same thing. Nothing has changed about our plan. Every year, More people have joined our effort, and the RTC commissioners and Metro board members now reflect the public's demand for a solution. It's time to put aside the political tribalism that has seeped into our community and make sensible changes that we can all support. Please vote yes on D to start this process. Vote for a common sense solution on the rail corridor we can afford and maintain. Vote for beauty, safety, health, the environment, and something the whole community will love forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Bud Colligan. Now we move to Mark Messitti Miller, who is representing the no on Measure D position. Mark?
Well, thank you, Michael, for having us this morning. A pleasure to be here. Boy, how do you follow that bunch of baloney? I'll tell you, no matter what Greenway might proclaim, Greenway's Measure D is focused on one thing: permanently ending any possibility of future rail transit to serve Santa Cruz County. If this was not their sole objective, why would pages and pages of fine print in Measure B be devoted to amending the county's general plan to prevent transit, rail transit, bus transit, any kind of public transit in the rail corridor connecting Santa Cruz and Watsonville, and making sure that adding any kind of public transit back into the rail corridor would require another expensive countywide vote? Without any reference to rail transit in the general plan, the county will be legally prevented from even studying or planning for any future public transit use of the rail corridor. Without planning, light rail will never happen in Santa Cruz County. To get voters to give up the already approved Rail with Trail plan with benefits for everyone, Greenway has constructed a house of cards. Greenway claims Measure D will protect Roaring Camp and their beloved beach train. If this claim were true, why is Roaring Camp so strongly opposed to Measure D? Why did 7,000 people write to the RTC just this last February and object to rail banking the corridor? Here's why. Roaring Camp knows full well that if the corridor is rail banked, they will be cut off from the national rail network, and the beach train will end, gravely harming their business. Greenway claims using the rail corridor for a trail only will be good for the environment. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Unified Corridor Investment Study completed in 2019 by the Regional Transportation Commission decisively concluded that tearing out the tracks for a trail only will actually increase global warming greenhouse gas emissions when compared to using the corridor for both rail and trail. That's one of the many reasons the RTC voted to use the rail corridor for a trail alongside the existing railroad tracks. That's also why the Sierra Club, Regeneración Pajaro Valley Climate Action, Santa Cruz Climate Action Network, and Youth for Climate Justice all say vote no on D. Greenway claims they support public transit, Metro, Paracruz, Lift Line, Bus on Shoulder, but Measure D does not provide even 1 penny of funding nor a single reference to any of these vital public transit services. Furthermore, the Transit Corridor Alternatives Analysis published in 2021 by the RTC and the Metro, that's the county's public bus system operators, found that implementing electric passenger rail in the rail corridor was the best choice amongst all available options. Greenway's claim here is simply out of whack with the county's bus operators and transportation planners. Greenway claims Measure D has broad community support, but the publicly available evidence at the county election department contradicts this claim. All one has to do is check for the asterisk after the ballot argument and rebuttal signatures. All 10 signatures on the argument against and the rebuttal opposed to Greenway's Measure D were authorized by trusted community organizations from across Santa Cruz County. On the other hand, not a single community organization would authorize a representative to sign the argument for or the rebuttal in favor of Measure D. All 10 of those signatures were made by individuals representing only themselves. That not one community organization supports Greenway's Measure D speaks volumes. Greenway claims Measure D will bring many benefits. The truth is, Measure D will hurt people. The 2021 Transit Corridor Alternative Analysis found that adding passenger rail will provide dramatic reductions in commute times. In addition, adding passenger rail will increase public transit ridership by 150%, from 13,700 riders per day to 34,400 rides every day. That's an increase of more than 20,000 rides every single day. That's a lot fewer cars on the road, making our air cleaner and our streets safer. Measure D takes all these benefits away. The truth is, Measure D will only prevent light rail and cause years of delay in finishing the trail already underway. For all these reasons, Measure D has generated an unusually broad array of opposition, including chambers of commerce, environmental groups, labor unions, democratic clubs, social equity groups, elected officials, and folks just like you. Vote no on D. Get the trail everyone wants 10 years sooner, and keep the rail line for the future. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark. All right, here's a question for both of you. Starting with Bud, what happens if Measure D passes? Will the trail be finished beyond the 2 or 3 miles? I think you said has already been finished much faster, and then all systems are go? What happens?
Well, as I said, only 1.5 miles has been finished in 10 years, okay? And if Greenway passes, there will finally be the political will to move forward to build a trail. Right now, when we started out, Michael, basically 8 years ago, we lost votes on the Regional Transportation Commission 1 to 11. And then in 2018, there was an opportunity to really change tracks, and because we had the second freight rail operator resign, Iowa Pacific. And Mr. Messitti Miller cheerleaded for Progressive Rail to be a new contract with them. When we signed a 10-year contract, we lost that battle 4-8. Then Progressive Rail resigned in 2 years. Okay, so we've had this history of wrong decisions at the RTC to the point where now it's 6-6. So I'm getting to your question, and recently with the elevation of Ari Parker, the mayor of Watsonville, to the RTC, it appears that Greenway and its proponents have a 7-5 majority. That majority, plus a vote of the people, I think will speed the development of Greenway. It is true that the corridor needs to be rail banked in order to build Greenway. The RTC has its own consultant in 2005 who said that the Surface Transportation Board would approve rail banking on the corridor. This is their own consultant 17 years ago.
Forgive me, but what does rail banking mean? I don't understand that term.
Rail banking is a process by which the integrity of the corridor can be preserved, and it protects local taxpayers from any easement lawsuits. So anyway, the answer to your question is that once the corridor is rail banked, there will be an immediate movement to build Greenway now. And according to Guy Preston, the RTC director, he believes that the entire Greenway, the entire 32 miles, could be built in 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Mark, same question to you. If Measure D is to fail, and which is what you are advocating, what happens then?
If Measure D fails, there are currently 8 miles of the trail which are ready to go to construction. and will be under construction in the next 2 years. There's a section in Santa Cruz which will break ground this summer, about a mile long. There's a 5-mile section that is fully funded and ready to go from Wilder to Yellowbank Beach north of Santa Cruz. Another 2 miles that is partially funded that will extend the trail all the way to Davenport. There's another 8 miles of trail between Santa Cruz and Aptos that is on the drawing boards and will be ready to go to bid in the next year, provided Measure D does not pass.
Okay.
If Measure D passes, everything stops. This idea that the corridor could be rail banked quickly is a fabrication in the minds of the imaginations I can't even imagine. This is a federal process. Rail banking would isolate the Felton branch line owned by Roaring Camp, a federally regulated freight rail operator. There were 7,000 emails objecting to rail banking the line when the RTC even mentioned it in February. The Surface Transportation Board has never stranded a freight rail line, and Roaring Camp would be stranded. There's no precedent whatsoever for that. So if Measure D passes, everything stops, the litigation begins, and nothing happens for years.
I have to respond to that, Michael.
Go ahead.
First of all, the Greenway Initiative does not apply to any of the tracks north of the San Lorenzo Bridge. So Mr. Messitti Miller is misleading the listeners by talking about that area of the tracks. Segment 7B in Santa Cruz will be built regardless of whether Measure D passes or not. The section from Wilder Ranch to Davenport will be built. And in addition, he also misspoke or intentionally is misleading the listeners. The 8.5 miles from the San Lorenzo Bridge to Rio Del Mar, both alternatives, the Greenway or interim trail alternative and his trail next to the tracks, are both being explored in the EIR. Either plan can go forward based upon that EIR. So to say that everything will stop is basically a lie. And you know, we can't continue to give misinformation to the listeners when asked these types of questions.
Yeah, I beg to differ here. Mr. Colligan, in his opening remarks, said that the Greenway would be all 32 miles of the rail corridor. Well, all 32 miles of the rail corridor extends all the way to Davenport. So no matter what the Greenway claims are, the fact is that the Greenway proposition is for the whole 32 miles, and those things that are currently ready to go would be threatened. That's how it works.
No, that's just not true. If you read the ballot language, look at the impartial analysis by the county council, which is on the website. Greenway specifically applies from the San Lorenzo Bridge to Lee Road. There is no mention of anything north of the San Lorenzo Bridge. In fact, Greenway would never have objected to the rail and trail plan if it was just north of the San Lorenzo Bridge. There's no trees, there's very few gullies, there's very few geographic impediments in the trail from Wilder Ranch to Davenport. It would have been fine. There's a trail next to the rail in Napa. But when you get south of the San Lorenzo Bridge, you encounter hundreds of heritage trees. You encounter steep gullies. You encounter the need to construct huge retaining walls. That's why I said the character of the corridor will be changed forever. And we will be industrializing the corridor with floating viaduct bridges. Mr. Messitti Miller's previous consulting firm, Messitti Miller Engineering, is designing many of these things. So, you know, we're not in favor of that, no. we want to retain the environmental quality of the corridor. And if anyone wants to see it, they should go down and walk that corridor through Schwann Lake, through Trout Gulch, all along the corridor and see what the geography really looks like. Many people on the west side of Santa Cruz see their little rail and trail for 1 mile from basically Western Drive to California Avenue and think the whole corridor looks like that. It doesn't. It looks very different from that.
Yeah, I've walked many miles of I call them the choo-choo tracks. By the way, gentlemen, what is proposed about the train tracks? If Measure D passes, will the train tracks be removed? So that there will be significant costs involved in that, because you nodded your head, so that means yes.
Well, I nodded my head because, yes, for some of the trail, again, south of the San Lorenzo Bridge, the trail tracks will need to be removed. In other parts, no. It's important to note, Michael, that all the trail tracks need to be removed. They are 100 years old. This is an old freight line, and there hasn't been freight moving on this line for 15 years. The notion that Roaring Camp has freight is, again, a false statement. There has been no freight on this line since the Cemex plant closed in Davenport.
Well, that's been 15 years already?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, almost. I think it's 12 or 13 years exactly. So we've had 3 failed rail operators, okay? And all of the tracks are old tracks. The RTC says 100% of the tracks and 75% of the ties need to be removed. There's also a revenue source associated with removing the tracks. As you know, steel and iron ore are in high demand right now. So those tracks can be recycled. And with rail banking, public transit can be preserved on the corridor. If there is ever a time where it makes sense to bring it back, it can be brought back. And there are hundreds of corridors across the United States. We need to get out of Santa Cruz sometimes. 24,000 miles of freight rail tracks have been turned to trails, and hundreds of them have actually been rail banked. 11 of them specifically have returned to some form of rail service. So it's not impossible. The reason that corridors don't come back after tracks are rail banked is because of the economics. It just doesn't make economic sense anymore in many, many smaller branch lines to have freight move on them.
Mark, do you agree that that any way you cut it, the current rails need to be pulled out and replaced?
I would say that no, the current rail does not need to be removed and replaced to continue operating the rail line. The idea that the rail line is unsuitable for use and hasn't been used for freight rail, I think Roaring Camp would dispute that, since they've been bringing freight rail loads up to Felton for the lumber yard up there pretty regularly, and had other freight rail operations as well. You'd have to ask Roaring Camp for the details of that. The idea that Mr. Colligan says that 3 freight rail operators have failed is just another deception. When the rail line was first purchased by the County of Santa Cruz, the rail operator at that time was also the owner of the line, so they walked away at the end of that transaction. So they found a new operator who did not fail because of Santa Cruz branch line freight traffic. They failed nationally. That whole operation, Iowa Pacific, failed at the national level. And now we have a new operator, Progressive Rail, which Mr. Colligan points out was brought on board in 2017, and they are still the rail operator. So to make a statement that they are failed after 2 years is also inaccurate. The idea that rail banking will result in bringing back rail, he likes, the Greenway folks like to throw around this idea that, 24,000 miles of tracks have gone away and never come, but the truth is none of them have come back. The 11 that Mr. Colligan refers to, 9 of those, they never pulled the track out. Those lines were reverted before the track was ever pulled. There are 2 remaining. One, the tracks were pulled. No trail was ever constructed other than a local neighborhood trail that people started using. And there was one which had a gravel trail that was installed on a temporary basis, and that one is now gone. So this idea that in the last 40 years, 23,000 miles of rail line have been removed and trails put down, paved trails like Greenway's proposing, they've never come back. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines have been rail banked and paved, and they've never been reverted to rail service.
I would
like to add that the Greenway, which is being defined in the measure as a 3-lane paved road consisting of a 2-lane road for bicycles and a 1-lane road for pedestrians with a buffer in between, is not the interim trail that's being studied by the RTC right now. That Greenway is a 26-foot wide paved surface. And the idea that it's not going to take out heritage trees and require retaining walls is mythical thinking. The difference between the Greenway at 26 feet wide and the rail with trail at 29 feet wide is a whopping 3 feet. If anyone thinks that saving 3 feet of space in the rail corridor is going to save thousands of heritage trees and prevent the construction of huge retaining walls, they are just being misled.
The Mr. Messitti Miller is infamous now for parsing words without any distinction. But what I would say about the interim trail and what the Greenway Initiative actually says in the ballot language is that the ideal trail, of course, is separating bikes and pedestrians from bikers and wheeled traffic, fast traffic moving. But that where there are geographic constraints to the ideal, that Greenway proposes to implement a trail that does not go that wide. For example, when it crosses the Capitola Trestle, where the rail and trail plan wants to divert pedestrians and bikers into Capitola Village, which, as you know, Michael, is heavily impacted by traffic and is very dangerous going down East Cliff and up Monterey Avenue. The bridge there is only 16 to 18 feet wide. So that's where Greenway would contract to use existing infrastructure. I want to make another point about the letters to Roaring Camp that Mr. Messitti Miller brought up. 7,000 emails. Most of them were from people out of town because Roaring Camp misled its constituency that it's had for 50 years, that somehow the beach train was threatened. The Greenway Initiative has never threatened the beach train. It stops north of the San Lorenzo Bridge. It's welcome to continue operating. It's got a great operation now. There is nothing that threatens the beach train at all. So there's a lot of misinformation that goes around for political purposes, and I think the listeners need to really parse through some of this, tricky language about deception and everything. Greenway has been proposing the same thing for the last 8 years. There's no deception. We're a grassroots movement. We had 170 volunteers gather signatures. We gathered over 13,315 certified signatures. And so, people can say what they want. In terms of endorsements, Mr. Messitti Miller just said that we don't have community endorsements. In fact, the Santa Cruz County Business Council just endorsed us this week when we faced off. They're the largest, they represent the largest employers in the county. They are endorsing Yes on D. And the Pajaro Valley Chamber, most of the endorsements that the No on D side has, never even asked us to present, if you can believe that. That's what's come. You mentioned the polarizing nature of politics in Santa Cruz County. Mr. Messitti Miller was able to go convince them to endorse his side without them ever even coming to ask us to present. And now the Pajaro Valley Chamber, which originally endorsed No on D, reversed and withdrew their endorsement this week and is now neutral. So I rest with the 20,000 plus people who have signed the Greenway petitions as more a reflection of what the community believes.
Okay, do you have anything to add to that, Mark? Looks like we've got
Sure.
quite a number of callers already. We haven't even opened the phone lines, but
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. It's really a sad day, Michael, that Mr. Colligan is choosing to attack my own reputation and the reputation of Roaring Camp, accusing us of fabricating, making stuff up. It's a sad day when Mr. Colligan claims that the rail trail plan is to diverge through the Capitola Village when the plans clearly show the rail trail being immediately adjacent to the rail line right across Soquel Creek with a brand new structure. It's a sad day when Mr. Colligan claims that petition signatures are endorsers. This is a sad day.
okay. Let's open the phone lines. It looks like we have space for only one or two more callers because the rest of the phone lines are jammed. 479-1080 in area 831 is the number to call if you want to join the conversation. Ask questions of our guests, Bud or Mark, or make a comment about the Measure D. And let's see, it looks like Judy in Watsonville has been waiting the longest, so let's take her call first. Judy, welcome to KSCO, the Saturday special, with the discussion of Measure D. You're on the air.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, thanks.
I am a Watsonville resident, a Watsonville enthusiast, and I wanted to address Mr. Colligan a few things to retain the environmental quality of the corridor. I will say my point, and then I believe that the greatest asset we have to do that, to retain the environmental quality of this corridor, is that we have a rail bed and tracks in place. Environmentally sound wisdom is to eliminate private car transportation and to make increase public transportation. We are beyond fortunate to have this. It's also a great fire access with this terrible climate change. And to close, I just want to say, in Latin, oblita privatori publica curat. Forget private matters. Look after public ones. In Watsonville, we need public transportation. Highway 1 is an embarrassment to our area. Please keep the tracks. Vote no on D. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling 479-1080. Our next caller is Margie in Rio Del Mar, who has a question. Margie, you're on.
You just got...
Oh. Jeez.
Michael, is there any?
I'm sorry, it's Mike in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
Since she addressed that
Thanks for the
point to me.
Sure. Hold on just a second, Mike. Okay,
Sure.
you'll be on next here. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Bud.
I was
Sorry.
just going to comment to Judy that thanks for your call, Judy. First of all, there is a lot of public transit between Watsonville and Santa Cruz. There are 110 buses every day running back and forth between Watsonville and Santa Cruz. On the environmental front, it's true that we're trying to maintain the environment and lower greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why strong environmentalists like Gary Griggs and Jean Brocklebank and Tyler Fox and Gillian Greenside and Franz Lanting, the famous photographer, Martin Quigley, who's the UCSC Arboretum and Botanic Garden Director, Lisa Sheridan, the president of Santa Cruz Bird Club, all of these people endorse Yes on D. And so I think a lot of people mistake the fact that train tracks are somehow going to provide magical public transit from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. But the RTC's own studies showed that there would only be about 300 round trips per day from Watsonville riders to Santa Cruz. So I think there's a lot better way to address that transportation issue other than spending $1.3 billion on a train that we don't have. And by the way, we don't have it. The RTC has already declared the train plan financially unfeasible. So we need to move on. We need to start exploring other options.
Okay, Mark, you have anything to add to that?
No, just briefly, the environment, it's the crucial thing. It is the number one topic on everyone's mind these days. Huge, over 1,000 homes were burned in the fires just 2 years ago. And there's no question that a rail with trail is superior to a trail only. In 2019, the Regional Transportation Commission completed a study indicating that the rail with trail scenario will result in a reduction of 230,000 vehicle miles traveled every single day when compared to the trail only scenario. The idea that a trail only will somehow get more people out of a car or reduce our car travel is ludicrous. That's why the environmental organizations in our county all support rail with trail and are urging the community to vote no on Measure D. The faster we get the trail built, the faster we get rail implemented, the faster we can create an integrated public transportation system, the faster we can get 20,000 more people out of their cars and onto public transportation every single day.
Okay, as promised, back to Mike in Santa Cruz. You're on the air now, Mike. Okay.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
This is an important issue. I would encourage us in the listening audience to zoom out a little bit and see how some of the other countries are using mass transit railways, like over in Japan, where they've got limited, acreage there. And before we do anything and being over idealistic about ripping out these tracks, it's too bad that our country didn't actually exploit mass transportation by rail earlier, before the big boom industry of individual cars took place. There's a balance. And with innovation and technology, there's different ways that mass transit could be powered via railway. We can see other examples like Japan, other countries. Once these tracks got torn out with all good intentions, it's hard to say with today's politics whether they'd ever be replaced. So I would urge whatever community meetings that would actually look at things from a futuristic point of view of how to implement restoration of efficient mass transportation on these railways. I mean, if we're talking about being green, that could be one of the most significant ways to encourage people to think a little differently, like they do in some parts of Europe and Japan. And so I'm not going to be voting yes on this, but thanks for taking my call.
You bet. Mark, you have a response.
I do. Yeah, thank you, Michael, for the call. I so appreciate your perspective. One thing I want to mention just very quickly, when you look at what the world is doing around rail transit, you really don't have to look any farther than the European Union. Rail transit has been an integral part of their transportation policy for decades. And the reality today is that the per capita energy use of the EU is 1/2 the per capita energy use of the United States of America. 1/2. We're using twice as much energy because we're driving around instead of hopping on trains and buses. And right here in California, the state has adopted the State Rail Plan in 2018, which aims to dramatically improve the rail network serving all of California. And the goal is by 2040 to have a rail network that will take as many vehicles as drive on I-5 every single day from the Mexican border to the Oregon border off the roads in California and put them on trains. That's the goal of the State Rail Plan 2040, and that's what Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line is part of. It's part of that plan. So I appreciate Michael's perspective, and that's how we need to think about this. What's the long haul? Where do we want to be in 20 years, 10 years? That's the plan.
I have a question for both.
I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah.
Michael, thanks for your call. I think it's erroneous to compare places like Japan, Taipei, China to Santa Cruz. We're talking about rail lines where there are 10, 20, 30 million people, okay? Santa Cruz County has a population of 270,000 people. All of this talk about rail is hypothetical. We have to have priorities. Do we spend $1.3 billion on a rail line, or do we build more affordable housing? Do we get long-term solutions for homelessness? Do we help our students in education? There is not an unlimited amount of money. Do we save the Watsonville Community Hospital? These are the questions we have to ask each other. The other thing I would say is we don't have to look very far to find failing light rail systems. Just look over the hill. You just drove down from San Francisco, Michael. In San Jose and Santa Clara, the VTA, Mayor Sam Liccardo called it not only a poor system, but a colossal mistake. So do we want to saddle Santa Cruz County taxpayers with that kind of colossal mistake when we can have the most beautiful trail in the world from Davenport to Pacific Grove? And right now, talk about the world, there is an explosion of bike paths being built in Europe and China and Japan, and even in New York and all of our major cities. During the pandemic, bike use and e-bike use exploded. And that is the trend. We have to do things that get beyond, let the wind be in our sails as we're going forward with technology and where things are going overall.
A question I've been meaning to ask you, Bud. The 1.5 miles of trail that has been completed, I should know the answer to this question myself because I've been on it. It seems to me that the rail is still there. Am I right, or were the rails pulled out?
It is still there.
Okay, so why were the rails left there and not pulled out if the plan, should Measure D pass, would be to pull out the rails?
Because, as I said earlier, the corridor in those areas was essentially flat, right? There was enough right-of-way where the gullies, the ravines, the bridges did not interfere with putting both of them next to each other. And as I said, we never objected to that. Our objections came from the San Lorenzo River south, where it's very, very difficult to construct that. Of course, with enough money and with enough environmental destruction of the corridor, you can build anything. So I'm not saying it can't be done. The question is, do we want it to be done? And since we don't have a viable rail plan, is it right to destroy the corridor now or wait 20, 25, 30 years, or maybe never to see if there is a viable rail transit plan that makes sense and that the community can afford?
Mark, I'm assuming you disagree that it will take 20, 30, 40 years you disagree with his last statement. I don't.
Of course. The facts of the matter, if you consult the Transit Corridor Alternatives Analysis that was completed just last year, the experts that authored that study under the jurisdiction and direction of the Regional Transportation Commission and the bus operators, our local bus operators, stated clearly in that report that passenger rail could be operational in 12 to 14 years. 12 to 14 years, not some huge, long way out there in the future time. So it just continues that these misstatements are driving me crazy. That Mr. Colligan says that no one ever objected, Greenway never objected to the constructions of the rail trail. There's public testimony at the city council meetings before segment 7 was prepared, was authorized to go ahead. one of the supporters of Greenway that Mr. Colligan proudly announced was that Jillian Greensight, Jillian Greensight is the same person who filed a lawsuit against the city of Santa Cruz in an effort to stop the construction of the second part of Segment 7. That lawsuit failed. Jillian Greensight is the one who appealed to the California Coastal Commission the decision by the city to move ahead with the Segment 7 rail trail that's now completed. She appealed to the California Coastal Commission, causing months of delay, and then didn't even show up at the California Coastal Commission hearing. Just wasted everyone's time. So I just take real issue with this idea that everything's hunky-dory.
Mr. Messitti Miller has been claiming that this trail will be built. When I first debated him in 2015, he said it was all going to be done within 10 years. And now we have 1.5 miles built. Every plan that we have in this county seems to go on forever. I don't believe the TCAA or the UCIS projections, even though the TCAA does say that it will be 2045 when the rail is built. Every plan here moves out 5 years, every 5 years. So to continue to quote these plans when they have been proven wrong time and time again, Mr. Messitti Miller has been wrong on cost. He's been wrong on progressive rail. He's been wrong on rail banking. Now the RTC says rail banking should be implemented whether we build the trail next to the tracks or the Greenway plan. So, the passage of time is our best indicator of who has been right. And I think Greenway has consistently been right in what it's said over the last 8 years. And time has proven that to be the case.
All right. We got a little more than a minute left. Amy Howe is in the studio here, wants to ask a question. You want to hold it over, or do you want to ask it now, Amy?
Yeah, I have a question, Mark, about the public transportation. But I think everybody worried about that, during the COVID, of course, because of COVID, whatever the ridership and the bar and the ferry was tremendous down. They almost near bankrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing is I feel anything the money taxpayer paid to give it to the government to manage it, to do something, and never gonna happen. For instance, a very short track to Chinatown, Power Street to Chinatown. I took probably 8-9 years already, never done, and something was wrong. These things happen again and again. Just we pay for the taxpayer, we pay for, never happen. Totally wasted.
Okay, we'll get into that next hour. We're in the final moments of hour number 1 of the KSCO.
Prunedale and Castroville in the westbound lane is also showing a 3 to 5 minute delay. Current temperature outside the KSCO News Talk studios, 56 degrees. Today will be sunny with a high near 71, south-southwest wind, 5 to 14 miles an hour. Tonight, patchy fog after 5 a.m., otherwise mostly clear, low of 43. Sunday, patchy fog before 8 a.m., otherwise sunny, high near 73, light winds. Monday, mostly sunny, high near 73, and current predictions are for sunny throughout the week. On the seas, today we have a small craft advisory in effect on the Monterey Bay through this evening. Northwest winds 10 to 15 knots with gusts up to 25 knots, becoming westerly 20 to 30 knots with gusts up to 35 this afternoon. Wind waves 1 foot, increasing to 5 to 6 feet this afternoon, with swells 6 to 8 feet at 14 seconds. KSCO News Talk time is currently 11:06, and now back to hour 2 of the Saturday special.
Yes. Oh, my God. It's much too loud. I think I just blew my eardrums out.
Oh, no.
So, anyhow, the Dave Cave is still happening. Just a quick reminder, Dave will be there for another almost 3 hours, right up until 2 p.m. So yeah, and if you haven't visited the Dave Cave, oh my God, what you're in store for, if you want to have a better performing body.
Or one that doesn't argue with you as much.
Yeah, yeah. And we do have a totally full board of humans who want to participate in today's program. Now, in order to make that happen, we have to follow formatics here at your favorite radio station. So let's officially open hour number 2.
Oh, hello, darling. I hate to hang up on you, but I'm sorry, baby, but I have to go. It's time for that wonderful record show. I'd love to visit, but you'll have to call back. KSCO has the inside track.
If you've been wanting to know everything there is to know about Measure D, you've come to the right place here on your favorite radio station, so stay with us.
I'm sorry, baby, but I really gotta go to KSCO Radio. Bye.
And our guests today are Mark Messitti Miller, who is representing the no on Measure D position, and Bud Colligan, who actually wrote Measure D. He's the author of Measure. Well, okay, I've got to get it right. What did you say?
I said our Yes Greenway Steering Committee did.
Oh, okay, yes. All right. So and you're obviously in favor.
Yes.
Measure D. So, and we've got a board full of callers. Our phone number is 479-1080. That's in area 831. If you want to send an email, send it to me personally, mz@ksco.com. We're going to be on the air right up until 12 noon, and we hope to get through a whole bunch of callers. Margie has been waiting an awfully long time, so let's put Margie on the air now from Rio Del Mar. Margie, you're on the air.
Good morning, and thank you, Mark and Bud, for offering this opportunity for my knowledge about this issue, because I feel that it's really important. I've been a resident of Rio Del Mar since 1984, and I do want to I want to thank also Judy and Michael, the call-ins earlier, because I could really resonate with their feelings about our plan going forward in Santa Cruz County really needs to look outside just Santa Cruz County. I feel as though we need to still be a part of the state and federal plan to keep the rails in place, because we don't know what the future is going to hold. I remember years ago there was talk about and quite a bit of controversy regarding the Watsonville Airport and wanting to close that down. And then soon after, the 1989 earthquake hit, and I was so relieved that we had the airport to be able to bring in some supplies. And so,
very good point. Very good point, Margie. Yeah, that's great.
I have a similar feeling about the railway, and why would Santa Cruz County want to completely shut itself off from the rest of the state when the state's got a momentum going to keep that going, and also across the United States. So I'm a little, I'm very concerned about that, because we don't know what that holds for us. And I also recognize that nothing is going to be happening within my lifetime. I mean, I'm looking at this for future generations, and we really need to trust that the, quote, colossal mistake that other communities have made, I really have more faith in Santa Cruz County to come and be creative about these obstacles that come our way. I don't remember the name of the person who called in and saying, this is really taking a long time. But, we have to remind ourselves that when the lawsuits come as barriers to interfere with the progress that's being made. So I really do, I'm in favor of keeping the rail. because I think that's just the smart way to go, keeping all options open. And my question today, and sorry about kind of rushing around with all these ideas, but, keeping Judy's comment about keeping Watsonville, because I've talked to a lot of people in my neighborhood. I'm surrounded by a sea of greenway signs, and mine is one of the only, I think I only have 3 no AD signs in my neighborhood. So I like to talk to people and really hear, what is it that, what am I missing here? Educate me about this, because I want to know. I want to make an educated decision about this. But I have a hard time trusting the effort that is really trying to stop keeping the rail in place. I need to read more and continue to think more about that. But
okay, Margie, why don't we let people hear? Why don't we let you? We have so many people on the line, and we appreciate that you called, but you've been on like almost 4 minutes already, and we still don't know what you want to say.
I'm sorry.
So
let me just
please say it.
I think that's okay, I will. Here is my question. Why does Measure D amend the general plan preventing the county from planning for any use of the rail corridor other than a 3-lane greenway, and also from studying and planning for the 2-lane shared highway?
Okay.
Well, there have been a lot of, again, misinformed statements about what Measure D does or doesn't do. The reason it's a amendment to the general plan was because it was the only way that we could get a countywide vote on this issue. There have been lots of little pieces of this issue tugged into other ballot measures and so forth, but this was just on this issue, how do we get a vote? And the only way to do it was to amend the general plan so that everybody in the county could vote. That's number one. I should say, secondly, that the No on D campaign has tried its best to prevent people from voting. It didn't want people to vote. It tried to stop our petition signature gatherers, farmers markets, and walking around and so forth. So if you want democracy, I would say vote yes on D. The other thing is, many times people say, well, it takes every mention of rail out of the general plan. I went this morning and looked at the actual language. There's 33 instances of rail being mentioned in a very small amount of language for the Measure D initiative. For example, Measure D says we want to preserve and protect Roaring Camp. For example, Measure D says that we want to continue freight south of Watsonville. Measure D also says that we want to support the building of the Pajaro train station so that Amtrak and other trains can hook up from the state rail network. We're not against rail. The Greenway people love rail. We travel on trains just like everyone does in Europe and the United States and elsewhere. What we're against is the profligate waste of taxpayer money on something with very low ridership that is going to saddle this county with an albatross for years and years to come. And by so doing, will destroy our rail corridor and the opportunity to do something really great that all the community will love forever.
Okay. Mark, you have anything to...
Yes, of course I have something to say. Margie, thank you for that phone call. I'm glad that you're resonating with the no on D position like so many other people. I couldn't agree with your statement more that, we need to keep the rail in place to comply with the state and federal plans for increasing the amount of rail transit in the United States and in our county to get people out of cars and fight climate change. Your point about having an opportunity to bring in supplies in the event of a catastrophe is exactly why all 7 fire officials in the San Lorenzo Valley wrote to the RTC objecting to removing the rail line and rail banking the corridor, because they know that when the next catastrophe hits San Lorenzo Valley, that rail line is a lifeline. That's how we're going to bring in firefighting trains. It's how we're going to bring in massive amounts of water and other supplies to protect public safety. They don't have a They don't have a dog in this fight, but they do want to protect public safety. And that's why they say, keep the rail line in place for the future. Keep the rail line in place to protect our community. And I just want to respond also to the not in my lifetime comment. The truth is that if we can defeat Measure D, that the 8 miles of trail that are already being planned for Santa Cruz to Aptos will go forward and will be under construction by 2024, according to the Regional Transportation Commission's project fact sheet that was just recently updated. Thank you.
Can I just say something about fire officials? If the tracks were so important, how come they weren't used in the biggest fire that we've had in our history, the CZU fire? I didn't see any fire trains. I didn't see any trucks that couldn't use Highway 9. The fire was put out by engines that ran on roads that had to access remote areas. A fixed line is very difficult to do that. And relative to other emergencies, the tracks were washed out in 2017. May I also note, in terms of the rail, it may be a completely moot point because at the April 7th meeting of the RTC, a contract to repair the tracks on Manresa Bluff was terminated by a 9-0 vote. Why did that happen? Because the Coastal Commission complained that it is trying to move any heavy infrastructure away from coastal bluffs and low-lying areas that will be flooded. So if the train can't go along the Manresa Beach, along La Selva Beach, along over Harkin Slough, in other areas that have typically washed out, it's certainly not good for an emergency, but it's also not good for carrying any kind of heavy infrastructure because the Coastal Commission won't let it be repaired. Their official policy is to move back from the coastline as they're trying to get residents and heavy infrastructure to do. And that was confirmed by the Santa Cruz County Coastal Vulnerability Report in 2017, and it's being reaffirmed now by the Coastal Commission.
Okay, let's go back to the phone lines here. Take the next caller, which will be John in Aptos. John, you're on KSCO.
I'd like to ask Mark, what happened to Wrigley's and what happened to Lipton Tea and what happened to, if anybody remembers, Stokely Van Camp, and the sand trains that used to come out of Felton, and the cement loads that came out of CMEX, and John Ingalls that used to be down in the Santa Cruz yard. You keep pushing this freight deal. If it's bogus, there's not going to be any freight in Santa Cruz. There's not going to be any freight on the branch line. So would you just drop that one because it's not going to work?
Well, I would thank you for your comment, John. Your opinion is completely out of whack with the state of California's freight rail plan, freight mobility plan, which was adopted in 2020. So the Santa Cruz branch rail line is an integral part of the freight mobility plan for the state. And the reason that that's the case is because while industries come and go, as you've pointed out, we don't know what the future will bring. And what's happening right now, as many people have noticed, is that Amazon and other parcel delivery businesses are locating warehouses where people live. And they're right now bringing many of those loads to those warehouses by truck. And Amazon is looking for, as a specific company, is looking for locations where warehouses are next to rail lines because they don't want to pay the gas bill of delivering all that stuff by road. They want the reliability and efficiency of freight rail. And we don't want to give that up. Freight rail can run all night, nice and quiet. Electric freight rail is the same as electric passenger rail. It's, as quiet as any electric car will be. And we can deliver those products to where they're needed without using huge amounts of fossil fuels. So that's why freight rail needs to be preserved.
I would just, John, thanks a lot for your call because I think you're spot on. We have had 10 studies on rail over the last 38 years. If there was a rail line that was going to be built, how long should we wait? Mark would like us to wait forever. right? And the state and local governments are not the best people sometimes to solve all of our problems. I think we need to look at a combination of public and private initiative to move people in the best way that we can. When you talk about freight as well, not only has there been no freight, and there were many people, including Mr. Messitti Miller, who were urging us to sign the Progressive Rail contract. He said earlier that they haven't terminated yet they sent a letter to the RTC saying they wish to terminate, right? Why? Because they can't make any money. If a freight line is not economic, it does no one any good. And the tracks don't do anyone any good. And that's what we need to keep focused on. You can go to the RTC, do a public records request, or just ask them, how many carloads of freight have been moved on this line? I'm so tired of hearing people happy talk about freight when there is none. Go look at the data, right? You don't have to take our word for it. Look at the data.
Okay, let's go back to the phone lines here. Our next caller will be Matt in Santa Cruz. Matt, you're on KSCO.
Thank you very much. My question is, what are the business benefits of having both a trail and a rail? And why would Greenway want to forfeit those?
Business benefits.
Well, Mark wants to answer it.
Well, the business benefits to rail and trail are numerous. The idea that a trail only offers the business benefits that a rail and trail provide, it just doesn't even pass the common sense test. In fact, when the Regional Transportation Commission studied this idea, they found that across the board, rail with trail outperformed trail only from an economic perspective on every measure. And not only that, rail with trail had the incredible environmental benefits, and they had the incredible equity benefits of providing a way for the lower income socioeconomic peoples in our county to access the jobs and education opportunities in North County. And that's why they recommended building both. This is not an either or, it's a yes and. And at this point, I would like to mention, because it's really important to understand this, that even though people might vote for Measure D, if you look at the impartial analysis on the county's election site, it says, quote, "The Greenway Initiative does not guarantee that the Greenway will be constructed. But it does say, quote, would require removal of the existing tracks." So why would anybody in their right mind advocate or want to vote yes on something that doesn't guarantee a trail will even be built, but does guarantee that the tracks will be removed, taking away the opportunity for passenger rail transit forever?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but I want to respond to Matt about the business benefits. Well, in fact, the Santa Cruz County Business Council just looked at this issue this week, and I can tell you the 4 reasons that they decided to support Greenway in 2017. They said that the development of passenger rail on the existing corridor would never be politically feasible. They said the timeline for full implementation of passenger rail was at least 12 years away at best. That was 5 years ago, so only 7 years left. Now we say it's 23 years at best, and of course, I believe it will never happen. The third was that the development and operation of passenger rail is too cost prohibitive to justify the heavy investment of public funds. And the fourth was that the full realization of passenger rail on the corridor will not meet ridership expectations. That's what the business community is saying. They said it in 2017, and this week we looked at all those factors, and every factor had gotten worse, right? So, as I said, the passage of time is proving the validity of Greenway's points. Relative to Measure D and what it does or doesn't do, the No on D folks said they worked very hard against Measure L in Capitola in 2018, which was basically to preserve the Capitola trestle for bikes and pedestrians. When they lost, they said, oh, it doesn't matter. But it did matter because more votes for Capitola on the RTC moved us closer to getting Greenway. And then in 2020, we had the election for First District Supervisor. I'm sure many of the listeners remember that. It was John Leopold versus the former Executive Director of Greenway, Manu Koenig. Everyone said, oh, well, Leopold's going to win. He's a 12-year incumbent. He had every endorsement. In fact, all the same endorsements that Mr. Messitti Miller talks about today. And he lost 57% to 43%. The people spoke, right? So I think that the importance of Measure D is giving a clear and unequivocal statement of what the voters want to county officials.
You know, I just got to respond here. The Business Council is a group of, 70, maybe 70 businesses, but the Santa Cruz County Chamber of Commerce and the San Lorenzo Valley Chamber of Commerce, representing over 500 businesses across our county, have both considered the endorsement of No Way Greenway and opposition to Measure D, and they are both opposed to Measure D. And this idea that we're talking about the costs of everything, that's not on the ballot. These things that these are just red herrings that we keep kicking around here. What's on the ballot is whether or not the people of the county of Santa Cruz want to rip out the railroad tracks, cause damage to Roaring Camp, in Roaring Camp's own words, and prevent any possibility of using the existing rail corridor for any kind of public transit. No trains, no buses, no nothing. The only thing that will be allowed in that rail corridor is a 3-lane paved road consisting of 2 lanes for bicycles and 1 lane for pedestrians with a buffer in between. Who is that going to serve? How is that going to make a difference on Highway 1? How is that going to save any greenhouse gases? How is that better than rail and trail?
I think it's important to note that the county does not make the decisions about what to do on the rail corridor. The Regional Transportation Commission owns the rail corridor and will make all the final decisions about its disposition. It is a state-sponsored agency. What we are trying to do with Measure D is get a sense of the people about where it goes. If you read the impartial study by the County Council, what you will find again and again, and I would encourage all listeners to go to Santa Cruz Local and read the article by Stephen Baxter published on April 8th, because it's a fair and objective analysis of what Measure D does and doesn't do. I just want to make one other point about the chambers of commerce. Most of the chambers of commerce are mom and pop operations. It is really sad that both the Santa Cruz Chamber and the San Lorenzo Chamber did not take the opportunity to listen to the Yes on D side. Never asked us to come in and present, made a decision. So I think those endorsements lack a lot of integrity, and it's the same thing with over 90% of the other endorsements that the No on D side has.
Okay, we have a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails. Oh my gosh! So let's take the easy way, and I'll press take next, and that will go to Sean in Santa Cruz. Sean, you're on KSCO.
All right. To be fair, Bud Colligan's bio is not Greenway's bio. Greenway doesn't build, affordable housing, and I don't believe they've ever built a trail before. Does anyone remember the CZU fires?
I do.
All the CZU fire chiefs and the fire directors have made a public statement on the San Lorenzo Valley Post against rail banking, and those 6,000 plus messages to the RTC were to support our fire officials who want their crews to be able to do their jobs safely and efficiently and protect us all. It doesn't matter. You know what? If some of those people are from out of town, Santa Cruz is a public place. Nobody needs your permission to use the highways, use the rail, or to choke on your smoke. So, I would like to hear someone convince me right now how they know better than all of our CZU fire chiefs and fire directors and all their experience in all these years. I'm not buying it.
I think I'll let Mr. Colligan take that one.
As I said previously, I think there has been a lot of misinformation in the case of the San Lorenzo Valley. There was one woman who went around to all the fire chiefs and attempted to get their endorsement without hearing from both sides. I think the fire chiefs in the rest of the county did not follow suit, which is indicative of how that process played out. And as I said, I'm all for protecting our communities, in particular, any of the mountain regions that are exposed to fire. That's why my wife and I personally donated a number of cameras so that we could identify a fire outbreaks sooner. But as I said earlier, the fact that the tracks have washed out in near Harkin Slough, the fact that the line up to Felton is a fixed line and is better served by... there are no fire trains in our county, by the way. So I think that we need to be practical when we look at these issues and understand really where the best means of protecting our communities is.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. It's such common sense that a fire train is not in our county, but could be in our county if the freight line was open. The only reason there wasn't a fire train in San Lorenzo Valley was because the freight line was non-operational, as Mr. Colligan himself pointed out. Fire trains do not sit in any particular place. They go from fire to fire where they're needed, just like the hundreds or thousands of fire trucks that were mobilized from all over the western United States to fight the CZU fire. I think we need to listen to the fire officials.
Aaron Wayne emails mz@ksco.com. He has a question for the guests. Who is financing each side of Measure D? Bud?
Well, I'm glad Aaron asked that question. We have disclosures through December 31st. The next disclosure is April 28th. In fact, 82% of the financing for the No on D side came from 3 households. Mr. Messitti Miller and his wife gave $30,000. Another gentleman, Dan and Jill Dion, gave $30,000, and Sally Arnold, a former head of Friends of the Rail and Trail, gave $12,000. That's $72,000 of $88,000 of cash. So 82% came from 3 households. By contrast, Greenway at the December 31st cutoff point had about 400 donations. The median donation was $99, and no person gave more than 6 or 7% of the total that we had raised, which was $140,000. So I think the contrast between the No on D campaign of very concentrated people that have a vested interest in the rail and trail plan versus the broad base of support that Greenway has is very telling.
Okay. Do you have anything to
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Greenway had started fundraising in the summer, and the No on Greenway committee had only formed a few weeks before this first filing deadline. Since that time, the No on Greenway, a No on Measure D campaign has raised almost triple the amount of money that was there at the end of December. And we now number hundreds of donations from individuals across our county.
Frank D. in Soquel says via email, save the rail, dump the trail. The rail corridor is for rail use. Don't deprive Santa Cruz County of the only rail line we have. I oppose all the proposed trail projects. If no rail, then return the land to the adjacent property owners who had their land taken via eminent domain many decades ago. The taxpayers should not have to fund someone's fantasies that will certainly cost way more and return less of a benefit than promised. That's from Frank D. in Soquel. Let's see. There are a number of other emails, but we have plenty of callers, so let's take the next. Joel in Santa Cruz, thanks for waiting. You're on KSCO.
You might call. This question is for Mr. Colligan. I zoomed into the RTC's presentation regarding the plans for segment 8 and 9, and they stated that the temporary trail, which will probably, segment 8 and 9 is 2 or 3 miles, that the temporary trail would cost $18 million to build. And so if we only have 5 or 6 miles currently funded, that would leave about 25, 27 miles yet to be funded. So if you were to multiply that 18 million by, say, 7 or 8, you're up in the $150 million range. And so you're proposing that we spend $150, $200 million or $150 million to build a temporary trail that may only last 20 years. And at the same time, during this recent talk on the radio, you mentioned that you didn't want to have, we didn't have unlimited amount of money to waste. We didn't want to do proliferative spending, waste of money. So why should we spend $180 million on a temporary trail that would only last 15 years? Because it's going to take at least 5 years or more to build the 30 miles of trails.
Well, first of all, thanks for your question, Joel. I don't agree that it will only last 20 years. Trails are built last, decades, and I would expect this one to as well. Relative to your cost numbers, you mentioned segments 8 and 9, but let's go a little bit further to through segment 12. The total cost, excluding the Highway 1 bridges, is about $76 million for that 8.5 miles of trail on the interim trail, whereas the trail next to the tracks is about 180 or so million. So the difference just for 8.5 miles is over $100 million. So that's what I really object to, is spending an inordinate amount of money for a trail which is half as good. It cuts neighborhoods and ocean accents with a fence along the entire width of what it's trying to do. It builds huge retaining walls, floating viaducts, and it replaces so many bridges when we really don't need to do that. And it results in hundreds of heritage trees being cut and a complete change in the character of the corridor from an environmental standpoint. All that we don't have to do because we don't have any money to implement rail. We often talk about rail in this interview so far, but there is no rail plan. The RTC ruled that it was financially infeasible in April of 2021. So now the only question, as I said in my opening remarks, that we really need to debate is, which trail do we want to build? And we want to build Greenway.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, again, we're talking about, distractions. We're talking about things that are not on the ballot. What's on the ballot is, do we want to tear out the tracks? Do we want to end the possibility of ever having public transit in the rail corridor connecting Watsonville and Santa Cruz and all points in between? Do we want a rail and a trail, or do we want a trail only? That's the question. The money that we're talking about, I wholeheartedly agree with Joel. The cost of an interim trail in the last RTC meeting just earlier this week, the interim trail, which is just temporary, would be $76 million for 8 miles. That's that's a lot of money. Just to build the trail next to it is $150 million. So it's $75 million more. But to tear out that trail, the interim trail, and then build the way we want it, rail and trail, would be $250 million. So there's $100 million of waste. $100 million of waste. Yeah, rail and trail makes sense. Thank you.
The fact of the matter is that we're not going to get both. It's already been ruled financially infeasible. There is no money for it, and it has low projected ridership, so it's never going to get across the bar. As I said, we've had 10 studies over 38 years. If Mr. Messitti Miller thinks we're going to get both, what has happened over the last 38 years? What we're going to get is the rusted 100-year-old rail tracks with weeds growing through them and debris all over them, next to a fenced-in corridor with fences on both sides, which gets to a minimum width of 8 or 9 feet in some portions and results in the environmental destruction of the corridor. So that's the real choice we have to make. It's not rail and trail. It's trail or nothing.
Yeah, once again, Greenway is making this an either-or choice when it's not an either-or choice. It's a yes-and choice. The truth of the matter here is that the state is going to implement the state rail plan. They are going to transform California into a rail-connected state, and that means a dramatic change in the way people get around. The alternative, if we don't cooperate, if we cut ourselves off from the state rail plan, what that means is that we will be forever stuck with Highway 1. And everyone knows that you can't widen Highway 1 to meet the traffic needs, the transportation needs of our county. It doesn't work. And the state won't fund it. The $800 million it would take to add 2 lanes between Watsonville and Santa Cruz, plus the cost of driving cars on that, will make the cost of widening the highway over 30 years, which Greenway loves that 30-year figure. It would be like $4 trillion compared to $1 trillion or whatever for the rail. It makes no sense whatsoever to eliminate the most efficient way of moving people around, the way of moving people that gets us where we want to go without cars.
I think it's important to note, we're not cut off from the state rail plan. This is just a fiction. You can take Highway 17 bus over to the Diridon station in San Jose. It takes about a half an hour, and there's tens of buses that run every day. The same is true if you want to go take a bus, if you're in Watsonville and you want to take a bus to Salinas and catch the train there. Having this 20-mile connection on our branch line is hardly this super connection to the state rail plan. You're connected now. I would ask Mark, how many times has he taken the bus over 17 and connected to the trains over in San Jose? I mean, it's just this figment of people's imagination that we're cut off. You can take public transit today to connect to the rail network.
Yeah, everybody can take the bus. What a great idea. I think rail has proven itself superior around the world.
Let's get back to the phone lines because we have totally jammed phone lines. We hope to get to everybody in the 13 minutes we have left. Wow. Take next, that would be Bill in Soquel. Bill, you're on the air.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, this is a question for Mark. And I'm wondering, what would, maybe it's, well, yeah, it's just one question. What would, okay, so we can have just a rail, or we could have a rail and a trail, similar to what they have up in Sonoma County and Marin County. And I'm just wondering, what would benefit the most people?
Well, the answer to that question is pretty easy. A rail plus a trail will benefit the most people. The total amount of use of public transit would go up by 20,000 rides per day by adding passenger rail to our existing bus network right here in our own county. And that doesn't even include the thousands of people that would use the trail. So we have thousands of people using the rail, tens of thousands of people, using the trail, tens of thousands of people using public transit. It's a no-brainer. The most benefit for the most people is rail and trail. It can be used by everyone.
The reason that we're advocating Greenway is because over 2 million people a year, according to the studies that we've done, would use Greenway. And that is the case already in the Monterey Coastal Trail. You know, many people from Santa Cruz County actually load their bikes onto their cars and take them to the Monterey Coastal Trail to find a safe place to ride their bikes. The reason that we're advocating for a separation of bikes and pedestrians is for throughput. Alta Planning and Design has estimated that a wide multi-use trail similar to what Greenway is proposing would have about 6 to 10 times as much throughput as a narrow trail that is being proposed by the rail and trail folks. So I want to do what we can see elsewhere is working. The Monterey Coastal Trail, they paved over the railroad tracks, built it in the late 1980s, and it's used now by over 2 million people a year, 70% of which are locals. Let's just look around ourselves. Let's go south and look and see what Monterey County did for an example of what would be great in Santa Cruz County as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Let's go look and see what's being done elsewhere. 2 million people on a trail going a few miles versus 7.5 million additional people riding public transit. With rail and trail, we get 7.5 million on public transit. We get 2 million on the trail. That's a win-win-win.
All right, let's go back to the phone lines. Next caller will be Angel in Salinas. You're on the air, Angel.
Hi there. Yeah, I got some things to say about this. I am in favor of keeping the rail and trail because it appears, and I'm listening to this man, and I was a first responder. I'm also listening to the fire chiefs, okay? And it seems like this man either works for attorneys or he's a lobbyist.
Which man are you talking about?
The one in favor is just the trail.
Okay.
And it seems like he's trying to push his way. You're going to take this or else it's going to be my way or the highway. And to heck with the rest of the people. Now, you have the ability and must keep those train tracks. I agree with the man that is supporting rail and trail. Because once you get rid of those, why don't you put the money into repairing the washed out area and deal with some of the homeless situation, and let's get some freight in there, and let's get some passenger trains in there, because this global warming alarmist stuff, it's on an agenda, okay? So knock that stuff off right now. It's called seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall, okay? And as far as how many people this is going to help, just having bicyclists out there and stuff, that's not going to do any good. We need money. That doesn't bring in money. The train will bring in money, okay? It will help the economy. It will help also commerce. And this man, I'm not buying what he's selling. A lot of us aren't. We can see through this. It's not working. And I would say investigate Greenway. Investigate behind who's getting paid off to push this thing so hard.
Okay, thank you very much, Angel, for calling 479-1080. Our next caller is Tricia in Santa Cruz. You're on, Tricia. Tricia.
Is that me?
Yes, that's you.
Is that? Oh, great. My name's Kersha.
Oh, Kirsha, sorry.
So I'm a local school teacher, and a lot of our school teachers, a lot of the people who work in our local schools in Santa Cruz, are forced to live in South County and commute. And Mr. Colligan, how are you going to help commuters? I personally sold my car 16 years ago to help the climate, and I would not commute. It's a difference between, people on the Monterey Coastal Path. They're having a nice little, sunny Saturday ride. They're not commuters. People will not use the trail to commute into work 14, 15 or more miles. So I wonder what is on your personal agenda against a train, and have you taken the SMART train up there in Sonoma County? You fly by people sitting in gridlock. I have commuted because I have a bike. I commute often by bus, and I sit in traffic on the bus around here. So I don't know what planet you're on, but the solution is to have a rail that you can roll your bike on, just like in Sonoma, and fly by the gridlock. That would support our climate. I don't understand. I really don't understand your personal agenda, and I wonder if you're going to benefit financially. I have heard you are going to benefit financially. So how are our teachers and people who are in schools and the people who work commuting from Watsonville? They will not take a bike. How are you going to get commuters into Santa Cruz and support our climate?
Well, first of all, thanks for your question, Kirsha. I have no personal agenda. I am not going to benefit, nor is anyone else in Greenway financially. A lot of that misinformation comes from the No on D side in a desperate attempt to try and discredit Greenway. As it turns out, the SMART train, which you referred to, which used to be used as a model for Santa Cruz County, the voters defeated a extension of the sales tax to support it in 2020. So right now, the SMART train is going to run out of money in 2029. I admit that mostly for high-income riders, and you could look at all the research, the train is often pushed as a means by which low-income people are going to commute. In fact, it's just the opposite. The average rider of the SMART train makes about $70,000 plus a year. And other studies have been done showing it's the same people that are benefiting from train ridership. Why? Because train fares tend to be about 3 times as much as bus fares. In terms of commuting, there are ways on bikes and e-bikes to commute shorter distances. I agree with you that it's not going to be a solution for commuting from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. However, it is a solution for students to go from Watsonville to Aptos High School, which many of them do, or to Cabrillo College, for example. It's also a solution, since most car trips are 5 miles or less, for people that are in Mid-County or North County to get out of their cars and get on their bikes and walk and run, etc. If all of those people start using a safe place to move in our county, I think that we will see a reduction in Highway 1 traffic. Relative to the SMART train, there has been no reduction or no discernible reduction in traffic on Highway 101 in Sonoma and Marin. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We need to move this along. But before I forget, because I'm sure I'm going to before the end of the program, so I'm going to say it right now. This program, the Saturday special, has always been repeated 12 hours later. So if you missed the program or any part of it, or if you want to hear it again, tune in to KSCO tonight between 10 p.m. and midnight for the replay that always happens. Also, we have our KSCO app that we've had for years and years and years, and we're very remiss about not reminding people that every hour we should be doing that, and we don't. So I'm gonna do it now. We have an app, and you can search your app store, regardless of the kind of phone that you have. It's a free app, and you can it's just search your store for KSCO, and you can listen on demand to any of the programs that we produce. So free KSCO app for all platforms, KSCO.com, our website, or even ZBSradio.com. Next caller will be Eva in Santa Cruz, who has a comment. Go ahead, Eva.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have a couple of comments. One is Mr. Colligan made a reference to the 20,000 petition signatures collected representing the will of the voters. But my experience with the petition collectors were that I had two. One was in front of REI collecting petitions. The person had no literature, no information, and just said, "Oh, if you want a trail, sign this petition." That's all he had to say. So, of course people want a trail, but they didn't know what that petition was really about. The other thing is at a farmer's market, which I was there shopping, and there was I guess it must have been a fort table, Friends of the Rail Trail, and there were also Greenway petition collectors running around accosting people, even though that was against the rules at the farmer's market, but they continued to do it even after they were asked not to. So my experience with the petition gatherers was that they're dishonest and kind
Okay,
of
well, listen. This doesn't follow the format. We're at the end of the show. Firefall in Pacific Grove. You're the last caller. Make it quick, please.
Okay, the catastrophic environmental damage done on Monterey Peninsula shoreline. It's completely erased all of the diversity of marine life. That bike path was catastrophic. You cannot walk to the water anymore. People have fallen off and been killed because of the straight drop created by the bike path. This is in Monterey Peninsula, which also eroded all of the cliff sides onto the beach. And now all the diversity, and I'm talking about, I was here in the 60s. There's no more starfish.
Okay, you made your point. Sorry to have to cut you off. We're at the end of the program. Our thanks to Bud Colligan and Mark Messitti Miller. And what we must do at the request of an emailer, you've got to have you guys back before June. So we'll figure out one way or another to make that happen. Thank you for participating.